Okay, let's be real for a second. Workplace drug testing in Missouri. It can feel like you're walking a tightrope through a legal jungle, right?
Definitely not a fun experience for anyone.
No kidding. But whether you're the one giving the test or taking it, understanding these rules is super important.
Yeah, it's not just about, like, following the letter of the law.
It's about being fair to everyone involved.
Exactly.
So to help us all make sense of this, we're diving deep into, get this, Section 288.045 of the Missouri Revised Statutes.
Catchy, right?
Real page-turner. R.S. Me, for those of you Seek's lawyer.
Chuckles.
But seriously, this section, it's all about what Missouri considers misconduct when it comes to drugs and alcohol at work.
And this is where it gets interesting, because it's not as simple as just, having one too many at the office party.
Oh, so it's not like if I have a celebratory glass of champagne at a work event, I'm in trouble.
Not necessarily. The law uses this phrase, detectable amount. So it's not automatically saying you're intoxicated.
Okay, so what does detectable amount even mean then?
It basically means having any trace of a substance that goes against your company's policy.
Gotcha. So it's not the positive test alone that gets you in hot water.
It's the combo. A positive test plus violating your company's policy, that's when you might have a problem.
That makes sense. So it's not like a sip of champagne at a wedding will get you fired, but, showing up to operate a forklift after a few beers, different story.
Exactly, and that's where your employer's written policy is key. Think of it like,
Like those terms and conditions we all blindly scroll through online.
yeah. But in this case, you definitely don't want to just click agree without reading. Ignorance is not bliss here.
No kidding. So we're not talking about some ancient document gathering dust in the filing cabinet.
No way. This has got to be a clear, accessible, updated policy that everyone, and I mean everyone, can understand.
Employees, employers, the whole shebang.
Exactly. Think of it like a two-way street. Employers got to make sure their policy is easy to find, post it up, put it in the employee handbook, maybe even send out a quick reminder email every now and then. And the content, it needs to be crystal clear.
So no vague statements about no drugs or alcohol.
Exactly. It has to specifically say what kind of drug tests they're doing, what happens if you fail, the whole 9 yards, no surprises, no room for interpretation.
No testing roulette.
Right. Speaking of testing, Missouri law allows for 4 main types. There's random, pre-employment, reasonable suspicion, and post-accident.
Okay, so 4 main ways to spring a test on someone.
Well, not exactly springing. Remember, the employer's policy has to say which types of testing they use.
So if random drug tests aren't specifically spelled out in their policy, you can't just, pull employees aside out of the blue?
Exactly. And even with reasonable suspicion testing, you need more than just a manager's gut feeling,
It can't be like, oh, I think Jeff looks a little too happy today. Drug test.
Right. We're talking documented observations of behavior that actually suggests impairment on the job. Slurred speech, trouble focusing, maybe even the smell of alcohol. Things that are, like, objectively observable, not just a hunch.
Okay, so protecting employees from being unfairly targeted while still giving employers a way to address legitimate safety concerns. It's a balancing act, for sure.
Absolutely.
But what about union situations? Do those agreements change how drug testing works?
Definitely. Union contracts often have their own rules about drug testing, and they can be even stricter than the state law.
Wow, really?
Stricter. As long as they meet those minimum standards set by Section 288.045, they can add on their own rules too.
So it's like an extra layer of protection for those employees, making sure things are fair and don't step on their rights. It sounds like Missouri's serious about accuracy in drug testing. What's there to make sure these tests are actually reliable?
You're right. Accuracy is huge. That's why in Missouri, all tests have to be done by labs certified by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or a similar organization.
So not just any lab can process these tests.
Exactly. We're talking strict standards to make sure the results are as accurate and reliable as possible.
Because, let's be honest, a false positive could really mess things up for someone.
Absolutely.
Speaking of accuracy, let's talk chain of custody. Sounds kind of intense, right? Like something out of a crime show.
A little bit, but it's a really important part of making sure the drug testing process is legit.
So, explain it like I'm a suspect in a made-for-TV crime drama. What's the chain of custody all about?
Okay, so imagine your sample is the key piece of evidence. Every step it takes, from when it's collected to the lab analysis, it's all documented and witnessed. Nobody can mess with it without anyone knowing.
Like a VIP escort, but for my sample.
Exactly. That's the chain of custody. It protects everyone, both the employee and the employer.
We're back and still knee-deep in this whole drug testing thing in Missouri. We've covered a lot of ground already, like clear policies, chain of custody, all that.
Definitely important stuff.
But now I'm curious, what about everyday medications? Could those accidentally trigger a positive result? Stuff you wouldn't even think about.
Oh, absolutely. You'd be surprised what can set off a drug test. And we're not even talking about like strong painkillers or anything. Think common cold meds.
Really, like over-the-counter stuff?
Yeah. Especially those ones for congestion or if you're like drowsy, they often have ingredients that could raise some eyebrows on a drug test.
So that decongestant I take could get me in trouble.
It's possible. Same goes for allergy meds too.
Wow, okay. What about prescriptions, though? Like for mental health stuff?
Those too.
All right.
Antidepressants, anxiety meds, they can sometimes cause a positive result. Even some prescription painkillers, although you've got a doctor's okay, could raise a flag if your employer doesn't know about them.
So basically, if you're taking anything with a prescription, better tell your employer just in case.
Exactly. It's super important to be upfront. Provide a copy of the prescription, explain the situation clearly, and keep a record of that conversation just in case.
Transparency is key. Makes sense. Better to be safe than sorry, right? But let's say someone does test positive, and it's not because of a prescription. What happens then? Is it an instant game over, or are there, like, levels of consequences?
It's not usually a simple yes or no situation. A lot of factors come into play. Obviously, the company's policy is a big one. Some are strict, zero tolerance. Others might be a bit more, understanding.
So it's not just the company's overall stance on drugs. There's more to it than that.
Right. The type of job matters, the employee's history with the company, things like that.
So, like, a truck driver who tests positive for something, that's a bigger deal than, say, someone who works in an office.
Exactly. Way different when public safety is on the line.
Makes sense. But even if getting fired isn't automatic, a positive test could still have some serious consequences, right?
Oh, absolutely. Disciplinary action, maybe suspension, mandatory drug counseling. It could even make it tougher to get a new job down the road.
So it's not something to take lightly, that's for sure. What about employees who might actually be struggling with substance use? Is there help for them?
Absolutely. Again, open communication is super important. Many companies offer employee assistance programs or EAPs. These programs offer confidential support and resources for employees dealing with substance use or even just like personal stuff they're going through.
Yeah. So a potential lifeline for someone who needs it. But it all comes down to, like we said, open and honest communication.
You got it. A positive test might feel like the end of the world, but it doesn't have to be. There are resources and support systems out there. Now, switching gears a bit, we've talked about what employers can do, but what about the employee side? What legal protections do they have during this whole process?
Yeah, it can't all be about the employer, right? What's there to keep things fair and prevent, like, discrimination?
Right, it's all about finding that balance. We talked about some key protections already. The right to a confirmation test, that strict chain of custody. But Missouri law goes further. Employers can't use drug tests to get back at someone or discriminate.
So no singling someone out because you don't like them or because they, like, complained about something?
Nope. Drug tests have to be fair and unbiased, based on real reasons, not personal vendettas. But now, let's address the elephant in the room, shall we?
Oh, yeah, the elephant. I think I know where we're going with this.
Medical marijuana, legal in Missouri, and it adds a whole new layer to this whole drug testing thing.
Talk about a curveball. So how do these two worlds collide? Legal weed on one side, workplace drug testing on the other. It's like mixing oil and water, isn't it? Medical marijuana, legal to use, but not necessarily legal to test positive for at work. It's a real head-scratcher.
It definitely creates a tricky situation. You've got employees with the right to use medical cannabis legally, and then you've got employers concerned about safety, productivity, and maintaining a drug-free workplace. It's a tough one.
So even if I have a medical marijuana card and I'm using it legally, my employer could still fire me if I fail a drug test.
Here's the thing. Right now, Missouri law doesn't specifically protect medical marijuana users from employment decisions based on a positive drug test.
So there's no guarantee of job security, even with a valid medical marijuana card. What about accommodations? Do employers have to make any kind of allowances for employees who use medical marijuana?
And to add to the confusion, Missouri law also doesn't require employers to accommodate medical marijuana use on the job.
So let me get this straight. An employer doesn't have to provide a safe space for an employee to use medical marijuana during the workday. even if it's for a qualifying condition.
You got it. Employers can stick to their drug-free workplace policies even if those policies don't directly address medical marijuana.
Talk about a gray area. So
Yep.
where does that leave employees using legal medication, but potentially facing consequences at work? It seems like a real catch-22.
You're right, it's a real balancing act. And it'll be interesting to see how this evolves as more states legalize marijuana, both medically and recreationally. It's a whole new ballgame.
It feels like we're all just figuring this out as we go.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of us who use medical marijuana legally, but are worried about our jobs, what's the best course of action?
Well, I always say knowledge is power. First things first, know your company's policy. Like, really know it. Does it specifically mention medical marijuana? Are there exceptions or procedures?
So don't just assume. Go back and read the fine print.
Exactly. And then have a conversation with your employer. Be upfront about your situation, provide a copy of your medical marijuana card, and be ready to talk about any safety concerns related to your job.
So even though the law doesn't require employers to make accommodations, it's still worth having that conversation.
It can't hurt. You'd be surprised how many employers are willing to work with their employees, especially when they're proactive and show they're committed to both their health and their work.
Open communication, always a good policy. This has been incredibly informative. As we wrap things up here, any final words of wisdom for our listeners trying to navigate this whole drug testing maze in Missouri?
Remember, laws change, regulations change. What's true today might not be true tomorrow. So stay informed, don't be afraid to ask questions, and if you're ever unsure about something, talk to an employment law expert. They can give you personalized advice based on your specific situation so you know your rights and what you need to do.
Solid advice. Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the ins and outs of Missouri's workplace drug testing laws. We hope you found it helpful, or at least not too overwhelming. Remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that matters to you.